What? The static electricity. So always do this part of your build first before you unpack static sensitive things. And especially don't have 64 core processors that you just used as a box opener, you know, nearby where static electricity could fry them. Look at the front panel. At the front, we've got two USB 3.0 and a USB-C. Of course, my gigabyte motherboard doesn't have a USB-C header, so the USB-C is not connected at all. Then I have a single combination headphone microphone jack. Look at the rear. The fan is adjustable. And this, the pièce de résistance. I mean, technically both sets of tops are ventilated. It's just ventilated around the edge, which, yes, that's gonna restrict airflow, and yes, it will work better if you have higher static pressure fans, but that wood grain. Oh, it's even detachable. Like, you could take the metal off. This would be great for case modding because you could do whatever you wanted with this setup. You could get any kind of a veneer for the top. That's pretty cool. This is the slate blue option. So we do have, we do have some breathability on the side panel with a dust filter. Then of course that sort of Fractal signature design, internally reconfigurable modular innards. Now for your power supply, you can rock a standard size ATX power supply, but I'm gonna recommend an SFX power supply. It's mounted vertically, and bundled with the case, you do have an extension cable, so you can do that. Now the big attractive thing about this case is that even though it's pretty compact and it's ITX, it does not require the use of any riser cables or extension cables. So your normal ITX motherboard fits here, and your normal 2-slot GPU goes in the bottom. This is especially important for AMD users that want to take full advantage of PCI Express 4 graphics, because no extension cable means that you're not going to have any trouble with PCI Express 4 GPUs. I know there are PCI Express 4 compatible extension cables out there, but I haven't had the best luck with them. I mean, even the ones that I ordered from Alibaba before Corona-chan, they'll let you use the system for a while, but I think the incidence of blue screen and black screen and just dropouts during things like heavy gaming or heavily GPU intensive workloads, it's not the best situation. In terms of cooling, this thing will actually fit two 120 millimeter radiators or a single 240 millimeter radiator. The screws on the side here are configurable, so you've got some options for these trays. So here's the larger power supply mount, here's the smaller power supply mount, and you can unscrew this and move this up and down so you've got a little bit of room with how you do stuff. This of course will hold 3.5 inch and 2.5 inch hard drives, and sort of blocks the installation of your GPU. Also extra tall GPUs, like we've got our MSI RTX card. I love this card. This card is great. This card is not gonna work in this case. It's basically a 3-slot card. There's just, it ain't happening. Now the bottom is ventilated as well. There are these side vents, and so it will draw air in from the bottom if that's how you have it configured. There is not enough room in the bottom for a 2-slot graphics card and fans. There's just nowhere to put them. So, what's the build like? Well, I do have some notes for you. First off, I'm running a Prime 95 torture test for a little over an hour now, and we're looking at about 39 dB, give or take. This is from approximately 12-inch distance. I'll be quiet now. You might be able to hear it in the microphone. It's just on the edge of annoyingly loud. And according to the not super scientific sound meter here, it's just right on the edge of 40 dB. Building in this thing, I've got a lot of notes for you. First off, I am using a wood top panel, which is maybe not the best case in terms of cooling, but it's a little odd because this is set up for an exhaust. And in order to install this, you have to have the magnetic dust filter in the top. You cannot run it because this is magnetic and the magnets are in the other piece of plastic. The dust filter restricts airflow a little bit, so you need higher static pressure fans, or at least higher static pressure fans will work better to force air to go through the vent. And it is fairly toasty air coming out of there. Now in terms of like gaming and non-torture test workloads, it's a bit quieter than this. It is actually surprisingly quiet. I tried to test with a Radeon 5700, the blower style 5700, as well as what's in there now, which is a GTX 1060. The 1060 operates quite a bit quieter, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, you could use a non-blower style 5700 or 5700 XT. There's not really any clearance issues. I used a Deep Cool Captain 240. It's a 240 millimeter cooler. It's a little thicker than most. The pump setup is a little taller than most. But this build was still a pretty effective build overall in terms of cooling capacity and other features. Now for the motherboard, I'm using the Gigabyte Aorus X570 ITX. I rotated through some graphics cards. I've got ADATA XPG memory in there. It's the 3200 ADATA XPG that I reviewed a while back, but it's in there. It's clocked at 3200, no problems. Tried a mix of SSDs. Right now I've got the InModus SSD in there because I really want that single thread at that 1T QDepth performance, and Modus has got the special sauce firmware on their SSD, so in terms of benchmarking, I can get it a little higher. I'm running a 3800X at the moment. I also tried a 3900X and a 3950. The 3950 was fine with the Captain 240 cooler, but it was not boosting as high as I've seen it on other setups. So I think I would recommend no more than a 3900X if you want the maximum boosts. But the 3950X, under normal workloads, didn't push the fans as hard on the 240. So the 3950X, I mean, it's got a lower operating voltage because it's 16 cores versus 12. I think it's bend a little better. So for not quite so demanding workloads, you could theoretically end up with a quieter system, maybe. But again, no empirical data on that. It's just purely anecdotal. So the power connector here, there's not even a millimeter of clearance. So the power connector here for this GTX 1060 is wanting to dislodge the side panel. The side panel does not snap on as well as it should. Also, I've got the SFX-L power supply in here right now. I mean, yeah, the SFX-L, it's a longer version of the SFX. This is a Seasonic Focus. These are great power supplies, especially for small form factor machines. This is a 650 watt one. But because this power supply is a little longer than a normal power supply, it really created issues for me trying to install longer GPUs. So you're gonna want a normal SFX power supply, not a longer SFX power supply. This genius mounting system that Fractal has lets you move the power supply up and down, but as you can see, I've pretty much got it shoved as far up as I could possibly get it, and no, there's not enough room with this power supply to do the other one. Remember, our Gigabyte motherboard has 2 NVMe slots, which is one of my favorite features about that motherboard, and it's still a standard size, ITX motherboard. On the rear side, it's really still very, very accessible. Ooh, it's toasty on this side. So in terms of like if I wanted to have a heatsink here or something like that, I've got plenty of clearance. There's tons of room at the back here. The cutout is very, very large. And with the side on, there is actually a little bit of airflow behind the motherboard, it seems. I would have liked to have had in the case like the splitter that lets you use like the 4-pin deal, and it gives you 2 3-pin jacks. Like some of the Fractal competitors include, but I did not see that in the accessory box. It's possible that I might have missed that. Check the Fractal website. It is a nice accessory to have, but there is a ton of room in here for drives. So I've got this here, which will hold 2.5 or 3, 3.5 inch drive or 2 2.5 inch drives. And then there's also a bracket that you can put here, which will make it harder to install and remove your GPU, but you can get a 2.5 or 3.5 inch drive on the bracket, depending on how you've got it configured. I think that it's generally going to be useful for 2.5 inch hard drives. So you could put up to 4 2.5 inch hard drives in here if you really, really tried. But again, case, not clown car. If you do the same build as me, one other note is that in the Gigabyte BIOS, it does not auto-detect the deep cool pump correctly. So I've got it on the sysfan header. You'll want to explicitly set your sysfan header to be full speed 100% all the time, or the deep cool pump does not run at the appropriate RPM. So overall, what's the verdict? I'm glad to see Fractal doing ITX cases like this. It's really awesome. It would be a lot more awesome if it were just a couple of millimeters bigger in a couple of key dimensions. I would love to be able to fit something really, really beefy in there. Like, this is a 2080 Ti WindForce from Gigabyte. This is a great 2080 Ti card. And it probably would fit if I really just, clown carded in there. But even with an SFX, a regular SFX power supply, it just felt like I was torquing the card in weird ways, and I would kind of like to not kill an over $1,000 graphics card. But that's just me personally. So I think if you're gonna build an upper mid-range card where you have an exactly 2 slot or less, not even this much more extra graphics card, then this is probably not a bad choice. And for PCI Express 4 builds, like I say, I think that not using a riser cable or a ribbon cable is great in terms of like not having to fiddle with it and not having that headache of, oh, maybe my riser cable is causing problems on my PCI Express 4 system, even when I'm running in PCI Express 3 compatibility mode. I don't think it's quite as revolutionary as the Fractal Node 304, but this is the new hotness in terms of form factor versus the Node 304. The Node 304 is a little dated in terms of form factor, let's be honest. And compared to this behemoth system back here, this is a 3647 Xeon system. This is like a $15,000 system back here. And you could fit like 4 of these in our case here. And this is a much better proposition, though those temperature spikes do worry me just slightly. Now, obviously it's gonna be a different scenario depending on what water cooler you use or what all-in-one cooler. You might be able to get a small tower in there, a small tower cooler, like one of the smaller Noctua tower coolers. But really this is designed for a top exhaust. The rear exhaust fan is not really large, and I'm glad the case comes with it because otherwise it would be problematic. But those fans are not super loud. By far the loudest fans in here are the deep cool fans, and they're not, they're just right on the edge. So overall, this is a pretty good build. I'm Wendell, this is level 1. This has been a quick look at a tiny Ryzen system that's not annoyingly loud and it can game. I'm signing out, and I'll see you in the level 1 forums. We should start measuring the internal case volume of tiny cases in terms of how many PoE Raspberry Pis they will fit on the inside. In which case, this case would be quite a lot from Fractal.